I mean this. I know you want it, I can see it in your eyes. So get up on it like you going for a prize. Once we get the fire started, no one survives. Burn it all night.
Right, let's move on to another equalizer, one that will show us graphically what happens when we select the different filter types. Those of you who've watched any of my other video tutorials will notice that I use blue a lot. What I like about the blue plugins is that you have graphical representations here of what's going on. So as we discussed earlier, we use different filter circuits and boost or cut them to selected frequency ranges. So let's go into the simplest one here, which is low pass. We'll get deeper into these shapes and curves and the way they respond in later tutorials. So this is the simplest form, a low pass. Basically, what a low pass filter does is it allows low frequencies to pass and attenuates the high frequencies. And it does this at a section we call the cutoff. This is the cutoff. So we select the frequency of the cutoff, and beyond the cutoff, we attenuate in a low pass. So anything past that cutoff, we are cutting. And we're allowing the low frequencies to pass. If I jump that into high pass, you should see this reverse. There you go. We're now allowing frequencies beyond the cutoff to pass through, and the ones prior to the cutoff to be attenuated. Band pass is simply a high pass filter and a low pass filter together. And the area that we're interested in is the area that's left in between the high pass and low pass filters. There you have it. And the high pass and low passes, once you put them together, you also can determine the width of that band that you want to allow through. We'll cover all this in detail later because they are very, very important. We also have band reject. Think of a band pass inverted. In other words, we're going to cut out this section here and allow the low and high pass filters through. There you go. This a band reject, also called a notch filter, and it's extremely useful for taking out problematic frequencies. We'll come to examples of this later. This tutorial is simply to ground you in what filters are, and I'm only sticking to the four most basic ones. And I'll give you a definition of all the terminology that we use. Well, not all, just some of the basic ones. So I might as well come on to that right now. Let's go back to the low pass and look at the cutoff frequency. This is the point or frequency at which the filter begins to filter or cut out. The filter will lower the volume of the frequencies above or below the cutoff frequency depending on the type of filter you use. And we've done that already, going through low pass, high pass, band pass and band reject. Attenuation, as was explained earlier, is lowering of the volume of the frequencies or cutting. I might as well talk about resonance, but I'll talk about it very, very briefly. Resonance is boosting the narrow band of frequencies at the cutoff. You'll see this in some of the EQs that we will use later. It's also known as Q and bandwidth. In effect, the higher the resonance, the narrower the bandwidth. Let me show you that. I'll explain all of these later. I'll explain what first order filters are, second order filters, etc. For now, it's really not important. This is the bandwidth. Or we're affecting the bandwidth. So we can narrow it out. You can see how much narrower it gets. The higher up we go in the values. Let's now talk about the slope. The rate at which a high or low frequency EQ section reduces the level above or below the cutoff frequency is termed as the slope. And the shape and parameters are denoted as dB per octave. And they're usually 6, 12, 18 or 24 dB per octave. Slope also determines the characteristic of the filter and can range from smooth to extreme. Basically what that means is that in the passive system that we had before, when you're dealing with octaves, you are either cutting by 6 dB or boosting by 6 dB per octave. Now you can imagine what happens if you're going 3 octaves up. That's quite a hefty and extreme boost. And to counteract that, the shelving filter was introduced. We'll talk about that later. Let's talk about some simple things, like a band. A band is a single filter in an equalizer or a range of predetermined frequencies. Let me show you that by loading up a graphic equalizer. A company called Nomad, which makes some very nice plugins, and this is their standard graphic equalizer. As you can see, these are what we call fixed bands. So that's 40 Hz, 63 Hz, 100 Hz. We can't alter that. This is a graphic system, and I'll explain to you why in a minute why it's called a graphic system. All we can do is boost or cut that fixed frequency. If you select this particular preset, which is called a hi-fi mix, actually it's also used in PA systems. This is what we call the smile curve, because it looks like a smile. And the reason we call it a graphic EQ is because this graphically displays the shape of the EQ curve or the EQ response. So graphically we can see what's happening here, and for that we call this the smile curve. Let's have a little fun while we're here. You can hear that there's a lot of the middles missing from this piano. If I bypass it, it sounds far more middle and top, less bass. This one has a lot of bass, a lot of top, very little middle. Why don't we shape that a little? Let's bring the bass down. Let's boost some of the middle here. Whenever you're boosting, always compensate with the output section. Let's just have a little fun. Now let's start boosting the lower frequencies. Bit of the top. And listen to what happens when I boost specific frequencies. And I know this one's going to have quite a dramatic effect. Here is one called a telephone mix, and I'm sure a lot of you will recognize it straight away the minute I play it. This is the equivalent of band pass. Low pass filter, or low cut here, or low pass, or high cut, high pass, both together. So we've cut out the low and the high frequencies, and we've only left the middle range. Have a listen. Let me bring that down just in case it clips. Okay, let's move on. Now we come to things like the center frequency. And for that, we need to look at another type of EQ.
I mean this. I know you want it, I can see it in your eyes. So get up on it like you going for a prize. Once we get the fire started, no one survives.